Hello and welcome to episode 17 of Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast that tests the limits of the friendship of two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss, here with Ryan Ebling. Usually, Ryan and I like to watch and discuss movies we've seen and disagree on, but every now and then we like to watch something we've been meaning to see, but just haven't gotten around to yet. For this episode, we've decided to watch Ang Lee's 1997 exploration of 70s suburban life, The Ice Storm.
And The Ice Storm isn't a tremendously well-known movie, though it was received well enough by critics. It's got a 75 on Metacritic, and it earned just over $8 million. Sigourney Weaver was nominated for Best Supporting Actress award at the Golden Globes and at the BAFTAs, but otherwise its reputation has just sort of steadily grown over the years, and it's more or less well-regarded by movie fans, so we thought we'd see for ourselves whether this movie is worth the modest hype.
If you usually listen to the podcast, you know we usually end this intro with a very witty reference to the movie.
Right.
It's a little tough to do with The Ice Storm, but here goes. Did it satisfy the emptiness that years of drinking and affairs have left?
Or are we still searching for meaning in our sad suburban lives? If you haven't seen the movie, trust us that we're referencing things from the movies, not from our real lives. So, plug in your headphones and have a seat on that guardrail over there. This one's going to be electrifying.
Wendy. A person's body is his temple. This body is your first and last possession. Now, as your own parents have probably told you, in adolescence, our bodies tend to betray us. And that's why in Samoa and other developing nations, adolescents are sent out into the woods unarmed, and they don't come back till they've learned a thing or two. Do you understand?
Well, that was Sigourney Weaver as Janie Carver giving some useful advice to Christina Ricci as Wendy. I feel like when I watched that, I really did learn something.
Yeah, I learned a lot watching this movie.
Did you?
Yeah.
So today we are talking about The Ice Storm, Ang Lee's 1997 exploration of suburbia in the 70s in Connecticut. And we had chosen this episode. At first, it was basically just because we were like, it's getting cold,
yeah,
and The Ice Storm's a movie I kind of wanted to see.
This shows you how little we knew about the movie, because we just said, let's say it's getting cold. Even though it was just a movie we wanted to see, we felt like we had to come up with a reason. Turns out,
right,
the movie takes place during Thanksgiving.
It couldn't be more relevant, honestly. We couldn't have picked a more perfect movie.
I watched it the
actually.
day before Thanksgiving, so I was like,
same here.
Wait a minute. I guess this is
yeah,
absolutely perfect, and we didn't have to say anything dumb about it being cold.
True. Plus, I also thought it was really a really interesting segue from our last episode, The Avengers, which immediately goes into a talk about the Fantastic Four.
Yeah,
in Marvel.
That's right. Yeah, so many connections. So, tenuous connections that turned out to be perfect connections aside, what made you want to see this movie?
Well, let's see. I feel like The Ice Storm is one of those movies that just kind of sat in my, whether it was a Netflix queue, I don't think this is on Netflix. It was just sat in this my mind's queue of movies. You have those movies that just linger there for so long and you just never get to.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'll get to it I got to get to it one day.
Yeah.
And I actually do want to see it. It's not like it's something that I don't want to see, but I feel like I have to kind of eat my vegetables. It was like, it was a movie I wanted to see. I really love Ang Lee, good cast. And I tend to also just, this is the kind of movie I'm naturally even drawn to, like just these, they've gotten a little tired over the years, but these sort of explorations of suburbia, social critique. There was nothing in this movie that was making me not want to see it, but I just never did. I mean, how about you? Why was it that you just never caught up with I mean, to be honest, I was a little young to really be interested in it when it came out.
I don't even remember it coming out. Like,
I mean, I do.
It's not like it's something that my parents and their friends saw, and I was curious about it. Like, my parents would never want to see this movie.
There was never a ton of buzz about it. Really.
No, and it's just it's one of those movies that it came up enough that I was like, oh yeah, I should see that. But it didn't come up so often that it was like, okay, all right.
It wasn't.
I get it. I have to see this movie. But you're right. I like Ang Lee a lot. I mean, I was curious, but I never felt urgency. So I'm glad we actually, kind of pushed each other to see it
right.
a little bit. Well, glad is a relative term.
Right. And I also, when I say this is a movie that I'm drawn to, I don't know what that says about myself.
Yeah.
Because
you didn't go into specifics about what about this movie is a movie that you're drawn to.
Yeah, I don't know that I really can, although I'm one of those weirdos that kind of just likes darker films and that they don't scare me. I also hear a lot of people that, say things like, there's enough terrible things in the world. Why do you want to sit through that?
Well, and we would talk about that coming up. But
okay. That's never been on my mind when I consider whether to see a movie or not.
Well, here's the thing. I had no idea this was a depressing movie. I didn't know anything about it.
Really?
Yeah. Like I
did you at least know there was an ice storm in the movie, or did you think maybe it was kind of
I didn't know if it was figurative or not. But I got it from the library this last week, and we were going over to a friend's house for dinner, and they were like, "Yeah, bring a couple movies if you want." And this was one of them I brought, and they asked me what it was about, and I was like, "Oh, let's see." And I read the back, and I was like, "Oh,
maybe not want to gather the family around."
Yeah, I had no idea about the key parties or anything like that. But I maybe the way I'm talking is not indicative of how I felt about the movie. But let's talk about how we felt about it. So, Nate, did you like The Ice Storm?
I did. I liked it a lot. I mean, liked as in, these are pretty depressing characters in a lot of ways. Yeah. I think that there is so much that you could get out of this movie. Mm-hmm. There are so many different angles you could take that we could even discuss, as far as what?
This is so dumb, but just making an angly pun on angles.
There are so many angles that you could
anglies that you can.
Right. What are we doing?
Sorry, go ahead.
But there are so many different ways that you could discuss this movie, things that you could look at, and I think that's kind of a hallmark of Ang Lee in general, is that you could watch the movie, on the surface of things and get one thing out of it, and then you could watch it another time, or not even watch it, but just think about it over the few days past after seeing it, and really start to think, well, maybe the movie was about this, or or start reflecting on something else that happened in the movie that you didn't think that much about when you watched it, but it stuck with you. And so I know, it's hard to say like it or didn't like it. I did like it, but that makes it sound like this was like Star Wars or something like that. Like this is just something that you're going to be, that's just going to be a thrill to watch. But I just really appreciate this movie.
Yeah,
I really think
that was actually the word I was going to use. That the fact that I didn't necessarily enjoy the viewing experience is more of a testament to Ang Lee's abilities than it is to the quality of the movie.
Yeah.
Because you're not supposed to like what's happening. But I definitely appreciate the acting, the filmmaking, the story. I appreciate all of it. And so for that, I like this movie. I think it's a very good movie. I'm with you. I'm glad sometimes in preparation for the podcast, I watch the movie the day we record.
Right.
And this is when I'm glad I watched a few days ahead of time, because you're absolutely right that there are things in the movie that just stick with you, lines or scenes or images or facial expressions, just things that you just kind of mull over, and they end up meaning more the more you give it time.
Right. Because actually, I think when I had seen the movie and I got to like the final scene, I didn't know what to make of it. Like you think you get a read on what's trying to say.
Yeah.
And it's not that the ending throws you. It's not like it's a shocking or surprise or twist ending or anything like that. But it's not an ending that interprets the movie for you, I don't think.
Oh, no.
It's a very...
it doesn't wrap anything up.
Right.
But it's not unsatisfying.
I feel like...
And it's not teasing.
Right. I feel like the very opening lines of the movie are about family and what family is. And it's actually using this kind of metaphor, I guess, of like superheroes and the Fantastic Four as being a family.
Yeah.
In issue number 141 of the Fantastic Four, published in November 1973, Reed Richards has to use his antimatter weapon on his own son, who a nihilist has turned into a human atom bomb. It was a typical predicament for the Fantastic Four because they weren't like other superheroes. They were more like a family. And the more power they had, the more harm they could do to each other without even knowing it. That was the meaning of the Fantastic Four, that a family is like your own personal antimatter. Your family is the void you emerge from and the place you return to when you die. And that's the paradox. The closer you're drawn back in, the deeper into the void you go.
And then I think there's obviously a lot that happens in between then and the ending.
Sure.
That certainly stretches what you're thinking about as far as what are we supposed to make of this particular family or of the families that are portrayed in this 70s suburbia.
Well, and what does this family say about my family or what I think family should be?
And then I guess like it gets almost to the point where you kind of wonder maybe this really isn't exactly about family, but then it kind of brings it back to that at the very end. It gets back into where it's basically just that nuclear family in that car.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like what's lingering when the credits roll is this family back together again, even though through most of the movie, they're actually not together physically. I mean,
no, you're right.
They're maybe there. They have the
Thanksgiving wife are, but
and they have the Thanksgiving dinner that really is not a long scene, really. And a lot of the movie, they're actually off doing their own things. The husband and wife are together. Wendy is doing God knows what with the neighborhood boys and the neighbor boys, and Paul is actually out of town for most of it. Hanging out with Nebless. Is that Niblets? What was her name? I don't.
Oh, what was it?
Levitz, yeah, Niblets.
Libets.
Right.
Was Katie Holmes's character?
Yeah,
that surprised me.
Her first film, actually.
Yeah. There was an interesting line in that opening part where it says about the Fantastic Four, the more power they had, the more harm they could do to each other without even knowing it. And that's one big thing in the movie is that people are acting very selfishly and not even realizing how much harm they're doing to the people in their family. And then by extension, the people around them, that it just kind of spirals out, this harm that you can do out of, whatever selfish choices or even just adolescent like curiosity is almost a power that they're gaining. The more power, the more knowledge they get, the more they harm the people around them. It is a fascinating movie.
Absolutely. And I think even just how much it really does portray that more than most movies, that there really are consequences for whatever your actions are.
Oh yeah,
good or bad, there are definitely consequences. You see the result played out, as painfully as it can be to watch on screen. You see that played out, and at first I thought at a very simple level, I kind of just asked, like, is it just a movie about parents who aren't any more grown up than their kids, that they're just making adolescent choices? It's there. And in fact, they really do draw the parallel even there, like where, especially between Joan Allen's Elena character and Christina Ricci's Wendy character, where she's even imitating her. Like she's almost jealous of this sort of free-spirited nature of Wendy. Yeah. So the next day she goes out on the bike and she shoplifts. And so that's where, to me, it was like, okay, there's a clear line being drawn here that these parents basically...
Well, they were following their children's lead rather than, setting an example for them.
Right. So at first I was like, okay, well, is that really just what the movie's about? Is what happens when parents don't act like parents? But what I think stretches this movie in a way and blows that wide open is the fact that the context in which all of this takes place. That 1973, like, there is such an important reason why this movie takes place at that exact time. And I almost felt like, talk about the craftsmanship of the movie, like the way that period is drawn and painted in this movie is so accurate in a way that it's not just accuracy. It's almost like
it looks like it was made in the 70s.
It does, but it almost has like this like historical drama approach to it, as far as like if you see something like when we think of historical dramas, we think of something like in the 19th century or
Right.
And what they'll do is they'll kind of like linger on certain things just to kind of like put you in that place, you know. And I think there are obviously plenty of movies that take place in the 70s. But this one really does kind of draw your attention to those 70-isms, I guess. Like, really does draw your attention to, like, the waterbed.
Yeah.
And, like, to just, like, the decor.
The clothes, like, it
draws a lot of attention to it.
Yeah, but not in any way that, like, is... Because you see historical movies that their costumes are just, like... Look at how much work went into getting this right. And it's not like that at all. It's a very lived-in movie.
Exactly.
And part of that is because we kind of just jump into the story of this family. Like, oh, he's already been having this affair. Oh, he's already sick of it. Like, this is... but I think on top of the fact that... well, I guess... did you say why you think it's important that it was set during that time?
Yeah. No, I didn't. I wanted to get to that, though, because what I think really challenges you, because you could watch the movie and you could say, oh, you know what? These parents, they just need to grow up. You know, if they just grew up, none of this stuff would happen. You know, look at all the terrible things that happen from the decisions they make because they're just so selfish and so immature. And the way that they're raising their kids, look at what the kids are doing because of the way they raise them.
It's really easy to quickly condescend.
Exactly. But you can't, because these people, this family started, I'm assuming because he says they were married for how many years? Like 17 years of marriage is what Joan Allen says.
And they've got a 16.
So they were married in the 50s.
Yeah.
They were grown up, quote unquote. Like, what I think you're seeing on the film is this is a family that, from society standards, and that it still carries over to this day. Like, we have a perception in our mind of what a grown-up family looks like. You know, the dad works the job. These days, it's not so much the housewife, but we still have like the parents are the example to the children. They've got it all together. They're very squeaky clean.
Yeah.
And it's a very idealized family. 2 kids, suburbia.
Yep.
It was all there, but this is happening right after the counterculture, you know, right after like the Summer of Love, 69. So it's getting to that point where all that stuff that was happening with the youth and the culture is now permeating into suburbia.
Yeah.
It's a very fascinating time period to look at specifically suburbia, because what's happening is these people who thought they had it figured out, you know, like he's got a good job, you know, they've got a nice family. And there's a lot of disillusionment, and there's a reason why they keep showing Watergate over and over on the TV, is just this sense of disillusionment in that time period.
Well, there's not only the disillusionment, but there's the idea, like when you've got Ben, Kevin Kline's character, is in Sigourney Weaver's house to have sex, and she leaves, and then he walks downstairs and sees his daughter and Sigourney Weaver's son fooling around, and he gets angry.
Right.
And you're sort of like, well, who's this guy to tell his daughter? You've got that with Watergate. Like, wait, these are our leaders. These are the people telling us what the rules and the laws of the land are.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They're the people breaking the laws.
Right.
Like, what?
Who has authority anymore?
Yeah, what's the point of having a structure here? And not only that, but you've got this idea that, you're right, I didn't even think about the sort of counterculture of Summer of Love just 4 years earlier, but that they would have been in their 20s during that time, and they're probably feeling pretty hemmed in and restrained, which is why when, you know, Joan Allen sees Christina Ricci riding the bike, she's that, oh yeah, I remember when I could break free.
Right.
And
it's funny, when I was in town, I saw you on your bike.
With Mikey?
Who?
Nobody.
Mikey Carver?
Oh, we were just riding around.
Well, you looked very free when I saw you. As if I were seeing my own memories of being a girl. There's something internal about it.
Yeah, there's just so much going on in these characters. I think you're right, that it's just by setting it in that time period and being so true to it.
Right.
And not just arbitrary, like, I mean, 70s family, you know, because it'll be cool to see them using...
stuff from the 70s.
Yeah, like not having her own phone in her room and listening to records. But like, it's actually like really...
It's important to the story.
Yeah.
That like we've seen a lot of movies that kind of look at suburbia in a critical lens. Whether it's everything from American Beauty to Desperate Housewives.
That's what I was going to say.
But this, I think, really is set apart from that. But go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say this was 2 years before American Beauty. I like American Beauty.
I do.
I like American Beauty. We're actually thinking about doing an episode.
There is a lot of backlash for that film, but I do appreciate American Beauty.
But I can see if I were a film critic or whatever, a film buff, and in 1997 I see The Ice Storm and really like it. Then I see, and it does very little, it just sort of comes and goes in the public eye. And then American Beauty comes and gets every award. I'd be like, well, wait a minute. Why American Beauty? What's so special about it? Like, Ice Storm already did this and had some layers that American Beauty didn't have or whatever. Right. Even the soundtrack was that very like...
the Native American sort of like flute
the flute
stuff.
But also there was like the sort of... it's not marimba, but like the xylophone-ish.
That's an American Beauty too.
Yeah,
so you can see that
American Beauty
was
like all that xylophone, and then everything after American Beauty used it. And so it's kind of like American Beauty took Ice Storm and was like, okay, let's put it in present
I can
day.
see a little bit of copycat in that, like because. What that soundtrack does is it allows you to have a sense of humor in your movie, but not lose the weightiness of what's happening.
And I don't think the Ice Storm had much of a sense of humor.
No, but what I was reading about, it's a really great essay because this was eventually put out on Criterion.
Yeah.
And there's an essay on the Criterion website. It's what came with the Blu-ray or DVD if you got it, by Bill Crone. And he does bring in a few things about the making of it. And I guess Ang Lee actually... I guess he cut the movie like 17 different times.
Wow.
Just to get the tone. Like he didn't know what tone he was going to settle on. So the movie could have been a lot more funny.
He picked the right one.
But he just found this perfect tone, I think.
It's unreal. The tone.
Tone is what Ang Lee is.
Absolutely.
I don't even know how to describe it. Like I couldn't break it down for you, but all I can say is it's tone. There's a tone to Ang Lee's movies that's just beautiful, you can meditative.
Feel it. Like you can touch that. It's so strong, but it's not heavy-handed. That's how you can tell that Ang Lee is an Asian filmmaker, is that like because like Japanese fiction is very different than Western fiction, and there's just something about the way that Asian artists approach art that's different from the West, the Eastern art versus the Western art. And Ang Lee brings that, and if you don't notice it or see that that's what he's doing, I can see dismissing his movies or just not getting them or whatever, and which is what made him such an odd choice for Hulk. Like,
I didn't see that one though, but
people saw Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and talk about tone. I mean, that movie is in layers,
right?
Like, there's so much to it, but the fight scenes were kick-ass, man. And so they were like, give him an action movie, he'll direct Hulk, and he made a tone poem Hulk movie, and people weren't ready for it.
Right. But it was within Ang Lee's...
he did what he was doing.
Right. To use the camera and use film to philosophize, I guess. Very few filmmakers can pull that off. Ang Lee is definitely one of them, and he does it perfectly in The Ice Storm. There is so much that you could just... Like you said, you can just sit on this for days and just think about it.
But it was a really interesting way to look at such an American concept. Like the suburbia of America, the 70s suburbia, the Watergate. I don't know if key parties are specifically American, but I think that's a unique...
Well, I think key parties to me is a suburban application of the counterculture. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, that's what I mean by like this is the counterculture is kind of seeping in, but
this is how we're rebelling.
But it's being reappropriated for these middle-aged.
Well, and it even still came from a counterculture. It was they talk about Deep Throat, the movie, and being influenced by that. But
they're almost talking about it as in like they're building this sort of cred when they're talking about it. Like, I saw Deep Throat. You know?
From Deep Throat.
The very one. Classic. Something about a First Amendment defense fund.
Ted took me to see it.
Oh, Ted, how romantic.
You know, I have to admit, the movie didn't do much for me. But being in that theater, surrounded by all those horny young college boys and perverts, I mean, there was something in the air.
But what I was saying is that Ang Lee is able to see something and depict something in such staid concepts that he brings into a new light, that you're seeing it for its sadness, regardless of the particulars or who's going home with whom. The sadness just comes through, not necessarily the betrayal, not anything, but the desperate despair is just palpable, which is part of why we're saying we didn't necessarily enjoy watching the movie.
No.
Side note, and this may have colored my viewing, I found out that I live in the North Shore suburbs of Chicago, which is not very different than the Connecticut they're
It looked very
depicting.
similar to where we are from,
Yeah.
the northern suburbs of Chicago.
I found out the night before we watched it that key parties are like a really common thing.
Where you're at?
Yeah.
And you should be offended that you haven't been invited yet.
I am.
You should
frankly.
be. Yeah.
No,
if I were you, I'd go knocking on those doors and say, just dangle your keys in front of them and say, hey, what the heck, man? I got keys.
Yeah. I drive a terrible car, but it has keys. No, but what it did, it just made it so weird. Like, so my wife and I watched it together, and we were both just like feeling weird about this key party thing.
Yeah.
And then like, it was just very strange.
I guess about that key party scene, like where they're actually grabbing the keys out of the bowl. What I appreciated was not everyone was disturbed or uncomfortable with that. Like, it was basically the main characters were, and you kind of knew the backstory as
well,
to...
and you got the sense that some people there were too.
There
like,
was
there were people who were there
you
but
had
didn't
every
take part,
response.
and,
like
people who were like totally down. And
you had the super creeps, the one that was like that mom brought her son.
Yeah.
And then he's like, more of these guys need to bring their daughters, you know.
Yeah.
You had this was actually one of the funny parts in that movie, was when the pastor was there.
You thought that was funny?
The line that she says was hilarious.
Reverend Edwards.
Perhaps you might find it in your heart to call me Philip.
You're here. I'm a bit surprised.
Sometimes the shepherd needs the company of the sheep.
I'm going to try hard not to understand the implications of that.
Like,
yeah,
when you fix like that,
I don't know. I thought that whole scene. Oh, that, yeah.
Like,
I didn't even pick up on that. That is funny. But I just was more saddened by that whole.
Yeah, and then he just
concept,
picks up,
like,
and then he just grabs his keys and goes.
Yeah.
You know, like, yes,
it's
a sad. What's happening in that whole part of the movie is just a very sad, uncomfortable affair.
Well, affair, yeah,
yeah.
And that's the thing. He gets all of that. Like, it's all uncomfortable. There's nothing sexy about any of it. There's nothing appealing about any of it. When Elena does end up going to the car with Jim, I think his name is, when they end up having sex, like the sound effects of just his breathing and like them hitting the door, like everything is just like very realistic and very awkward. Like he captures only the awkwardness and the uncomfortableness of sex. And
I wonder, and I'm not saying this to be cute, but it's very cold. Like, I mean cold as in like that scene especially is just very matter of fact.
Yep.
Like, you're just sort of a voyeur in that. And it's not anything interesting that you're watching.
You don't want to
like,
be
you don't want to be the voyeur. And you've also got like, there's the iciness of the actual ice on the windows. I mean, that's, I feel like maybe we should talk about this. Like, what do you think the ice storm represents in all of that? Like, obviously it serves its purpose plot wise. But I feel like they could have done that with a lot of different
why was it an
things?
ice
Like,
storm?
what was the whole meaning behind that? You know,
honestly, that's a good question. It's probably terrible that
there's
I don't
probably
have an answer.
There's probably a dozen different meanings that you could get out of it. But
in a way, it reminded me of like the frogs in Magnolia. just something that's like a wake-up call to everybody, like just stop, everybody stop.
Yes.
And nobody could get away from it. And it affected everybody. And it's almost, I mean, there's not really a tremendously real indication that Ang Lee was trying to have God get involved and just say, like, this has gone on far enough. But you get that sense that everybody needed to just, again, for lack of a better word, cool out. Like,
everybody freeze.
I was disappointed that it didn't end up being a tie-in to
Batman and Robin.
Yeah, that it didn't turn out that it was Mr. Freeze.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's sort of what I got, because throughout the movie there's just this lingering dread. Like the movie is so dreadful in the sense that it's full of this anticipatory dread. You're just like, oh, this is not gonna go well. This isn't gonna go well, and that's just literally shown and then exacerbated by the storm coming, the wind picking up. That just in the sound effects, you hear the wind more and more often. You feel the storm coming, and the rain starts getting louder to the point that I was genuinely like, oh wait, this isn't happening out. Like I honestly felt like it was happening at my house, that like I was going to look out and
it's true. I had the same feeling. I was like,
it should have been raining.
Yeah,
but it was. It's remarkable how he did that. So the reason I feel like it's this call to just stop what you're doing and reevaluate is because it's coming the whole time, and as their choices get worse and worse, the storm's getting more and more powerful. And
that is something that's unique to an ice storm, I think, is that it doesn't just happen. Like it takes a while for an ice storm to happen. It's got to rain. It's got to happen kind of overnight. Exactly. Yeah. And I also think that, like I said, there's probably a number of things that you could pull out of why it's an ice storm and not some other type of weather or other type of outside force coming in to bring everything to a halt. But, one thing I was thinking about is everyone here seems to be kind of fumbling, and you get that very literal sense in an ice storm of people just slipping, that there's the ground underneath you is just very slippery, and everyone is just trying to, I don't even know what they're trying to do. I guess find some kind of self-satisfaction.
Yeah.
But they're just doing it in such a, uncertain way.
These are people who are incapable of not making bad decisions. Everything they do is going to be a mistake. And if you didn't pick up on that, they're going out for a drive in an ice storm. They're
exactly.
Jumping, they're bouncing on an icy diving board over an empty pool. Like they are making dumb, dangerous decisions. And their behavior during the ice storm is indicative of the way they were acting with their lives. Like nobody was driving to take cover. Nobody was finding someone for warmth. Nobody was doing anything for any logical purpose, but let's slip and slide our way to the car so that we can have an affair.
And it's like they're only living in that moment,
right?
Like they're not even thinking about not even the next day. They're not even thinking about the next few minutes.
Right.
It's like, or anything about like projecting forward of what could happen by me doing this.
Right.
They're completely reactionary. Everything about what they do is just reactionary. Joan Allen's decision to just the Joan Allen character, I should say, Elena, her decision to just stay in there is completely reactionary to what she heard right before about the affair between the Kevin Kline character and Janie, Sigourney Weaver.
And Kevin Kline getting drunk at the party is in reaction to how Sigourney Weaver's acting and Joan Allen's acting.
Right.
And they're just completely thoughtless characters, let alone Paul, who we haven't even talked about what he was doing. And he was trying to drug up his friend so that he would be passed out so that he could drug up a girl and have sex with her.
Right.
And then she died, right?
Did she? I don't know. I thought that was
in
kind of
any
left
case,
ambiguous.
He left her in a bad state with these drugs. And all he can think about really is that he was like with her. Like he's smiling at the end of things. Like he's not, the implications of if she's okay or not, he just doesn't even think about that.
What you're saying is one of the reasons why when the film immediately ended, I didn't know what to think of it, because it almost seems like none of the consequences really mattered. Like the Elijah Wood character, like, he's dead. Those parents lost their boy, you know? And the Wendy character is not fully at fault, but kind of at fault, because doesn't she say she's going to meet him there or meet him out there, or she at least knows that he's out there?
Yeah.
And doesn't do anything about it.
Well, she got into bed with her.
She got into bed with
brother.
the little brother. And the Paul character, just like you said, like, he just leaves and you never really know what happened. Like you said, she could have died. She at least was not in a good state, like you said. And then where the film leaves you, I didn't know how to feel about it, because in a way it's very touching. It's a very warm scene, even. Like, it's kind of a warm, like, even just the way it's shot, it's like it's much brighter, like,
right.
And it's a warm family scene. And what I was kind of thinking is, okay, you know, is Ang Lee basically saying they've learned from their mistakes, and, you know, that's good for them, and it's kind of like, well, all those other storylines and all the other people involved, like, it just kind of leaves them where they're at.
Yeah.
They have to suffer through the consequences of the actions they made. That kind of pain, the pain that comes with the loss of a child, that doesn't go away. You know?
Right.
But the more I thought about it, again, this is just something that hit me like a few days later as I was thinking about it. I was kind of like, well, you know, both the parents and the kids are kind of in this state of adolescence. And in adolescence, you make a lot of dumb mistakes. You just do. Everybody does. I've got things I did when I was a teenager that I really regret doing. They were mean. I was not a good human being a lot of times when I was a teenager.
I work in a high school.
Yeah.
They don't think a lot.
Yeah. And so in a way, I feel like that movie is very true to life. Like, I can't go back.
Yeah.
I don't even think it'd be possible to see what the repercussions of what I did had, or the effect of what I did had on the people I did those things to.
Yeah.
But that's just how life works. And what happens is, and I think this is where the movie kind of just channeled in on that family, you do get a sense at the end of the movie that I don't know if they learned anything, but they were regretful. There was a feeling of regret in that entire vehicle when they're all saying, every single character, maybe not Paul. I don't know what, he's kind of a enigma to me.
Yeah.
But every other character, you could tell that they certainly felt impacted finally by what had happened and what they did. And that's true to life. That's what happens, is you hope that that's how you grow. That being a grown-up is not being like the perfect family, or being a grown-up or growing into things isn't sort of falling in line to this sort of idea of what society has. Being a grown-up is making those dumb mistakes and then genuinely feeling regretful about them, and hopefully you just move on from them. And who knows what that looks like? And that's kind of why I like that the movie just left it there.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't know what that looks like. You know, you don't know if that family is even going to really change afterwards, but you'd like to think that they will.
Yeah.
And it looks like there was something that happened on an emotional level.
Yeah, that's the first true emotional reaction from anybody, really.
Yeah.
And again, this makes me think of Magnolia again, when Jason Robards has that speech. He says, like, you know, people tell you not to regret anything. It's that you regret what you want and you learn from that.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because I kind of, after the movie ended, I turned to my wife and I was like, so what'd you think? She was like, well, that was sad. Like, yeah, that was sad. And
I was in a bit of a
time,
funk.
That was all I could think about was, and so when you mentioned earlier that something about when people say, why would you want to watch something so sad when there's so many sad things in the world? That, you know, this was one of the first movies, one of the few movies where I kind of felt that too. I was like, well, why did I watch that? Like, I'm a husband living in a suburb that has key parties. Like, I did not need to see this movie to confront the awkwardness of being around that.
Yeah.
I've never been near one. Like, obviously I didn't even know they were happening. And I think it gets at what you were just talking about, that what got to me was, well, I'm a husband who makes like dumb choices, like selfish choices. I'm not having an affair or anything, but like just stupid, dumb things. Not doing some of the housework when I would rather be doing something else, or like whatever. Just like, I'm like, I don't necessarily need to see someone making worse choices, and not feeling any catharsis through it. Like, it was because of the way Ang Lee does it. It's so realistic. Nobody makes a speech. Nobody has some revelation. The few times people try to make speeches, they are condescending and stuttered and weird. Like,
and stock, like like this. Are you talking about like when the Sigourney Weaver character is trying to lecture the Wendy character?
There's that one.
The scene that we played at the beginning of the episode. Yeah.
Right. But also, I actually wrote down, is this the weirdest sex talk scene when he's trying to talk to Paul in the car?
Paul, I was thinking this may be as good a time as any to have a little talk about, a whole gamut, facts of life. As I tell you, there's things happening that you're probably old enough to digest.
Things?
Well, things that happen between on the self-abuse front. And this is important. I don't think it's advisable to do it in the shower. It wastes water and electricity, and because we all expect you to be doing it there in any case.
That was not the only time that I wrote down, is this the weirdest such and such?
Yeah.
Because possibly the weirdest thing the movie does is the teenagers, like the 13 or 14-year-old kids, fumbling around trying to have sex, and she's wearing a Richard Nixon mask.
Yes.
And that's just
bizarre.
Like, it's weird.
But I think that that's important.
Yeah,
like, honestly,
that gets to the point that I was making about being in that, like, the parents making mistakes and yelling at the kids for making the same mistakes. The government, because that's the scene where he comes down and catches them and lectures them while he was in the house to have an affair. Who is he to yell at this person? And then he's yelling at Richard Nixon, and why is Richard Nixon?
But I also think that
there's heavy-handed.
But I also feel like even beyond that, there was kind of a purpose to that sex scene, not just being awkward because they were young, but it in almost like a subtext way. It's another way to just show that these kids are out of their element.
Well, it's that, or it could be making the parallel to the Key Party. Like, you've got this idea that, like, it's not an affair. The affair is when he chose Sigourney Weaver.
Right.
But it's not an affair when, grab the keys out of the thing.
When everyone's in on it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not me fooling around when I'm wearing this mask. Like, she could become a different person. I'm reading and teaching Lord of the Flies right now, so the idea of masks and using that to get away with doing whatever you want is very prevalent in my head, so that might be why I'm thinking about it, and it has nothing to do with the movie. But I don't think it's incorrect.
I think it does, though.
Like, fumbling with your identity and, like, I can cover my face and be somebody else, even if it's Richard Nixon or whatever.
And that character, that Wendy character, is all about asserting power through sexuality.
Yeah.
Sexuality is a power game to her.
Yeah.
She knows she has the power to kind of make these boys do whatever she wants them to do because she can use her body for that, and she's going to make it awkward for them.
Well,
like, she's not going to make it easy for them.
She doesn't even quite understand it.
I don't think so either. Yeah.
It's a very, very rich movie, and that's what I think in hindsight makes this movie so much different than anything that would be like, I don't even know if this is a term, but like despair porn, just like something that's just like everything.
We just coined it. I
hope so. Trademarked. But you know what I'm saying? Just like, everything's awful and these people are terrible, and then just worse stuff happens to them. It's like, why are we watching that? I don't think that's what's happening in this movie. I think, like we've said, there's so much more going on and so much more to be learned just from seeing them. I like this movie more after talking about it, though.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's another quality of these dark sort of contemporary, well, it's not contemporary, it's 70s, but I feel like these kind of movies do lend themselves to discussion, but a lot of times they're discussions we don't want to have.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, well, or a discussion you didn't know. Well, no, yeah, you're right. The discussion that you didn't even know would apply to you, because it's easy to watch a movie like this, or honestly, I just gave a speech to my students, read a book like Lord of the Flies and say like, oh, I'm never going to be like them. Isn't that great? I'm never going to make that big of a mistake. I'm never going to do that. But then you can see in a movie like this and a book like Lord of the Flies that where that started wasn't a crazy disparate place. Like, it started where we all are right now.
Going back to like, why do I put myself through a movie like this? And it's not like this is the most agonizing movie I've ever seen. I wouldn't say that. It's just
not. Yeah, it's hard to watch in a strange way.
Yeah, but I tend to watch those movies, and even though I do understand, like, okay, I'm not doing what they're doing on the screen in my life.
Yeah.
I get the idea that, like, these people are enough like me that I need to reflect and think about ways in which I probably do the exact same thing, maybe not at the same level, not the exact same choices, maybe even worse in some ways, you know, who knows? And I think it's exactly because they stick with you for so long, because you think about them for days, you know, after you watch them, that they do they're kind of like, in the way that the ice storm kind of stops those characters, these types of movies tend to kind of put a stop on my life and cause me to take inventory on a few things.
Yeah,
you know.
No, I agree.
And so that's why I really do see value in them, and I there is a place in me that loves just the escapism of the movies. And
that's a discussion in of itself. Is escaping from it by watching a movie, is that more irresponsible than watching more of it where you're kind of learning a lesson in processing?
Sure, yeah.
Because it reminds me of Mikey talking about the smell of things, that when you're smelling something, you're actually eating the molecules that have come off of it. So when you walk into the bathroom and it smells like poop, you are eating somebody's poop molecule. Like, you can't help but ingest and be affected by what's going on around you.
And Mikey also talks about, when he says why he wants to go look at the ice storm, is he talks about how the molecules are just stopping.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. He wants to go out in that because he can finally breathe clean air.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So there's, you know, I think there's just an endless number of things that we could talk about with this movie. And I'm, as far as watching a movie that we hadn't seen yet and trying to fill those gaps in, I'm really glad that we chose this movie. I really liked it. Sounds like we at least both appreciated it, and by talking through it have actually gained all sorts of new things to even think about.
Yeah,
so,
I'm really glad we watched something that has been staring at us from our various lists and cues.
I felt I'm going to get to go now and check off that thing on my watch list on Letterboxd. You know, by the way, if you are on letterboxd.com, which is a site where you can rate movies and things, we are on there. But this is one that's been sitting in my watch list forever, and I get to finally rate it, and it's going to feel good.
It'll feel good.
But we would love to hear what you guys have to say about the ice storm, or what your thoughts are on it. If you watched it beforehand, if you thought anything we said was crazy, or, you know, if you liked it, whatever. We just would like to hear it from you. So as always, please, shoot us an email, feedback@canwestillbefriends.net. You know, you can always leave us a voicemail and share your thoughts with your vocal cords. You know, and then we've also got the regular social media outlets that everyone has, Facebook and Twitter and things like that. So,
and we actually got a couple voicemails about the Avengers in response to the last episode.
We'll tag those
play
on.
A couple of those at the end. But one of the more important things that happened in one of those phone calls is that our listener Ben, he suggested a movie which was actually, I think a year ago we already had this movie picked.
We did. It was in the can. Yeah.
Ben is he's got an eye inside our minds apparently.
Like Sauron.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't want to offend.
Ben, let us know.
Ben. Yeah. So it's going to be the Can We Still Be Friends Holiday Spectacular.
Yes. Merry Christmas edition.
Live
Happy
from
holidays.
Radio City Music Hall, which is what we call Nate's office in his house. But we are going to be doing, and this is one of the earliest disagreements we had, and it's going to split opinion, and I'm sure a lot of you are going to hate me even more after this one, but we are going to be doing...
The whole idea of this podcast is that you might come around to it. You have to open yourself up to that.
Yeah. But the fact remains that pretty much every movie I've disliked is movies that people are like, why do you not like that? So
what's the movie? What are we going to discuss?
We are going to be watching the holiday classic that I cannot stand to watch.
But you're going to.
I'm going to. We're going to be watching A Christmas Story.
We just dropped a bombshell there, folks.
Yeah, I don't like watching that movie.
I love A Christmas Story.
Here's the thing. There's a reason I keep saying I do not like watching this movie, because the movie is painful for me to watch.
You watched it 24 hours.
Yep.
When they show it on the 24-hour marathon.
Yeah.
And you just thought that's a little too much.
I'm OCD like that.
Well, we don't want to get too much into it.
That's not true. But yeah, we don't have to talk about it.
That is going to be the next episode. It could get ugly.
Who knows? Maybe I'll love it.
The smirk on your face when you said that. Anyways, thanks for listening to the podcast. Welcome to any new listeners, and I hope you enjoyed our discussion of the ice storm. And we will catch you next time when we discuss Christmas Story.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Hey guys, it's Ben Krogh calling from Portland, Oregon, and I just had to say, whatever you do, continue to choose movies that you don't agree on, because it is freaking entertaining to listen to, and I kind of love it when one of you guys says something that completely takes the other off guard, because the reactions are pretty priceless. As far as a listener suggestion, I've been thinking of one as we're unbelievably sneaking up already on the holidays, and a movie that I watched a lot as a kid, and I still have tons of like baggage on is The Christmas Story, A Christmas Story, which is I think a great film to revisit if you guys are thinking about doing a Christmas episode. Just a thought, but love the podcast, and keep doing what you guys are doing. All right, later.
Hello, wonderful hosts of Can We Still Be Friends? It's Andrew. Nate, I have to admit, you were cranky. In the Avengers podcast, I think Ryan has got some fair points in regards to the Marvel Universe, where it seems that Avengers could do no right. It was doomed before it started, just because of your tiredness of the industry. There's so much that has been done right in the Nolan films, and then there has been so much that's just been done in regards to many of the Marvel films. Marvel has done some amazing things on film and has done some really awful ones. And I really feel Ryan's point was well made. And there is an inability for those of us who have been following this comic universe to come into these films and say, just how is the film? Because we cannot look through a brand new lens unknowing these characters. And you go and you watch the film on it, you're going to have the opinion, is it a good movie? Well, yeah, but for all of these things, Ryan and I and others who are nerds, there's an aspect of where we're going to stand and we're going to evaluate a film, and we have to evaluate it, is it a good movie? We'll kind of always say yes, kind of. That entertainment factor and is it true to form is always there, but we can't take it away. And so for Avengers, for all of us Marvel fanboys, aside from the Whedon fanboys, we come to that and we're saying, is this true to character? Is this continuing the serial that we have been following? And if it is, then we're excited. It may not be the best movie we've ever seen. It may not stand up to the same level of satisfaction as maybe an individual Batman movie. But my goodness, the Age of Ultron, that trailer, Nate, I'm so sorry to hear you say that did nothing for you, because the level of excitement for me as I was watching it, I'm just so excited to see the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver be developed in this next movie, where you, Nate, cringed at them saying we're going to do these movies through 2019. I was thrilled. So there's too much and too many thoughts. Thank you guys so much for at least thinking those things through out loud. Thank you for disagreeing so much to bring some life to that discussion. As always, continue to look forward to the next ones. Peace, fellas.